Okay, here's some interesting shit. So I've been studying super gauge and like what makes it build, what other things, whatever. Finding stuff like Chun or some other characters can get like certain combos that will deal combos that will build a full bar of super or more on their own, start to finish. Which some characters can do, some characters can't. As far as I've found, Chun is the absolute best at building super in a single combo, but I haven't looked at everyone yet. But anyways, one thing that I noticed about Drive Impact, so some of you probably, if you've been playing the game a while, you'll notice that Drive Impact can crumple you even when it's not a punish counter. So the way I've figured out it works is that if it armors through any hit whatsoever, its properties completely change. So basically, the way it works is that if it normally hits like this, no one builds any super gauge. If it's blocked, no one builds any super gauge. But once you hit him once with the armor, any contact it makes, regardless of if it's a punish counter or not, will trigger the thing. Will trigger if it armors anything. And it also changes the properties on the super gauge that it generates. So if it normally hits, doesn't build anything. If it gets the crumple, it builds both players. But as per usual, the attacker usually generates more. Like if I just keep hitting him all day, the one landing the strikes builds slightly more super over each action, and that is consistent because super gauge in this game is not scaled at all, so each individual hit will always, no matter where it's in a combo or something, will always build the same amount of meter super gauge. So yeah, any attack, any action landed on hit or on block will always build the attacker slightly more super gauge. Which means that if he lands a DI as a punish counter or as this weird fucking activation crumple state, he'll build more drive gauge. The thing about this, though, is that, say I counter DI, so he does a DI and then I counter DI, right? Gets the punish counter. I built quite a bit of meter super gauge, and he built like half as much, almost, so... Right? I mean, that makes sense. You know, I won the interaction, I build slightly more super because I'm attacking him. I would build even more for the combo afterwards. However, if you have hit him at all and triggered the extra state and then counter DI him, he ends up building more super than you. A lot, like... He ends up the one... So if you do a combo afterwards, it's about the same. It's about even, depending on what your character can do and how long of a combo you do. So I ended up building slightly more super gauge, but still, this one interaction builds him a shitload of super gauge because it builds him the meter from... The fact that you have armored it means that the game treats it as though he landed the strike, which means it builds him the huge chunk of super gauge that he would have gotten for landing the strike. Meanwhile, it only builds you the amount of, like, life that you would have obtained. Like when you armor something, the game no longer, like, discriminates against the move. Like, normally, if you get hit by something, you build an amount of super gauge based on the move itself and not necessarily how much damage it did. Like, if I got hit by a DP, it would do more damage, but build me less super gauge for getting hit by it. Like, DI, this crumple state is specifically made to build a lot of super, but if you armor a move, it no longer cares what the move it did, like what move you armored, it just builds you super gauge relative to how much damage you armored through. Which means that when you have struck him, and thus triggered the special state for DI, and then counter DI, you only build a little bit for armoring the DI, but he builds a huge chunk because the game thinks he landed it, quote unquote, and then your DI lands, and then you both build a huge chunk. So he ends up building more in the end. Really goofy. I don't know if this is even intentional, like the way this works, or if this is like, you know, a weird oversight in the design. It's pretty fucking weird. Because I've been experimenting with like what reasons you would possibly have to, because it does slightly complicate things. Because I've been experimenting with situations where it's better to not counter DI. And the issue, of course, is that so like take if I have like a low meter or something, I could counter DI off of like a block string if like I'm applying pressure and they try to bust out. I could counter DI, but I can do a combo afterwards and it does decent damage. And we both build a lot of super. I build a lot of super, he builds a lot of super. So depending if super is more valuable to me than it is to him, then it's probably worth it. I don't know. If he's already maxed out super, then it doesn't matter because he can't build anymore, so then it's probably worth it. Maybe. But if he gets more value out of supers than you, then it might not be, because you're basically giving him an entire super gauge just from that interaction if you've struck his DI and then counter it. So maybe in some instances it's worth using other options to beat the DI that will build you relatively significantly more super than the opponent. And also, to counter DI, it costs 1 bar. But when things cost 1 bar in this game, it's a bit misleading because, yeah, it costs just 1 bar, but you're actually losing like 2 bars. Because if my meter is regenning like it is right now, in a normal state, then when I spend anything, it will halt that regen for a while. And including if I continue a combo afterwards, I'll get some regen for the hits, but it'll be a while before the regen starts again. So if I do this and then do a combo off of it, at the end of it, when he's up, I have like almost 2 bars, or around 2 bars probably when I apply offense. But if I counter it without, I have like 3 bars. And it means that if I counter it with options other than you know, the thing, if I'm at 1 bar, I would have the opportunity to do like an EX route, because I would have more gauge at this point, and then that would do more damage. But then, you know, be even worse on meter gain. So I don't know, but be even better on super gain. It's fucking weird. So it's very bizarre that like countering a DI is the actual variables that you're working with, and risk reward and what meters you're increasing or what meters you're decreasing changes completely based on whether or not you've tapped him once during it. Because then he builds shitloads of super off of it. Yeah, it's weird. It is definitely weird. Yes. Weird is weird.